Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. I am your host, Marissa Tandon, and today my guest is someone that you've probably heard because I was just on Fan Behavior, her podcast, a couple weeks ago. Zoe from Fan Behavior, who is a co-host of Fan Behavior, it's a great podcast if you haven't listened to it, will be joining me today to recap the Mexican Grand Prix. So please welcome Zoe to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I had so much fun on Fan Behavior a couple weeks ago, so I thought it would be fun to swap. Have a good time.
It'd be so fun. You came in, you saved us. Hannah, my co-host, has been traveling. She traveled this weekend too, so I had co-host this weekend. There's been a lot of traveling, and you are reliable as ever. And we went into our whole origin story on that episode. But I was like, I gotta have Marissa on the pod because she'll be a great person for a race recap.
I appreciate that. And I would say that I had so much fun that we had to do it again.
So we had to do it again. And it was a good race. I feel like this is a great one for me to be on for. I mean, just
honestly,
for like entertainment purposes.
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And also I was like, originally you were planning to come on for the US Grand Prix, which would have been fun too. But what a twist to enjoy this race instead.
Exactly. Yeah, I had a wedding last weekend, and so I was like, you know what? I think it might be a little too much for me to do like my podcast, your podcast, the wedding. Like, let's just push it off a week.
Yeah, but I will say you did have it wasn't I don't want to, it was like I will make it work if you believe, and I was like so I appreciate your commitment.
Of course. I was actually like watching the sprint race as we were getting ready. I was in the wedding too, so it was like I was like in a corner with my phone, like iPad kidding it, watching everything. And all my friends were like, oh, that's just Zoe watching Formula One.
You are quite literally that, like, you're like that audio that's like, I never missed the Grand Prix.
Exactly. Literally. Exactly.
Well, I'm curious, since you're so deeply into it, I usually ask people to say like how they got into Formula One and which drivers or teams they support, just so people can get to know you and your biases before we get into the podcast.
Of course. Oh, biases. Hannah, we always say that we are a biased podcast, and we make that known. We make that very clear, which is important to do. So I got into Formula One in a very random way. I'm a big sports fan. I've grown up a big sports fan my whole life, but mostly team sports, football, basketball, soccer. I was a big, all those different sports. And then around the pandemic, I actually really got into tennis, which is and you're going to be like, how is this getting to Formula One? But there's a through line, I promise. And I was always like a casual tennis fan, but I like really got into it in 2020. And so got super into tennis. And then January 2022, they being Netflix, announced that they were going to be doing a Drive to Survive type of show for tennis. Now, at the time, I had heard of Formula One. I had heard of Drive to Survive. I'm also very into pop culture. I'm very into just kind of TV, all that stuff. So I was like aware of the phenomenon of Drive to Survive, but I didn't really know anything about Formula One. And so when they announced this tennis version of Drive to Survive, I was like, that's kind of interesting. And I think, and I knew that Drive to Survive was really influential in growing Formula One in America. So I thought, this could be really good for tennis, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So fast forward like a month, and I was looking for I work from home and I was looking for like a background show is what I call it, which is basically something that I put on while I'm working, doing kind of like busy work or something that I could just have like a show on that I'm paying attention to like 70%, I don't know if other people have that, but that was something that typically it's like a show I'm rewatching or something. Anyway. And so I think I was also getting a lot of Netflix, like on the homepage of Netflix where they are saying like, new season of whatever show coming.
Yeah, like a little alert.
Soon. Yeah. Right. And so this was February 2022. So the new upcoming season of Drive to Survive was coming out in a couple of weeks, like in 3 weeks. So I was getting subliminal messages about Drive to Survive. And then I was like, there's that Drive to Survive show. They're making that tennis version. Maybe I should watch this so I can get an idea of what the tennis version of the show would be like. Are they going to go in chronological order? Do they just follow one particular player? Like, I just wanted to know what's the format of this documentary show?
Right.
So one random day in February, I mean, it's so funny because if you would have told me, like, my life literally changed on that day, but I woke up on that day like it was just any ordinary day, turned it on. And obviously the first person we see is Daniel Ricciardo. This is not a unique story. Okay. This is a very basic story. And I was just like, I think I love this,
Yeah.
and just fully went all in. I loved it was such a new world for me. I didn't grow up, no one in my family watched Formula 1 or watched motorsport, no friends, like, I knew nobody who
Mhm.
knew anything about Formula 1, and so it was just like this new world that I was exploring for the very first time, and the drama and the drivers and the personalities and all that stuff. So, went full in, watched all the seasons. The new season came out, watched that, and then I went right into the 2022 F1 season. So it was really nice timing, like, it worked out well.
Yeah, perfect timing for
So,
you.
this is my 3rd full Formula 1 season, which feels like not very much time, but it also feels like it's been forever at the same
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my journey, and then we started the podcast. My friend Hannah and I, we're both the hosts of Fan Behavior. We originally started our podcast not as an F1 podcast, which
Mm.
that's a whole story for another day. But we both got so invested in Formula One that we were like, you know what? We want to rebrand this show to being a Formula One podcast. And so we launched as an F1 podcast ahead of the 2023 season. So this is our 2nd season being an F1 podcast.
Podcast, yeah.
And then as for my favorite driver, so I mean, Daniel Ricciardo is my forever driver, but we've lost
Alas.
him.
Yeah.
But I would say my top 3. So Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, and Oscar Piastri are my 3.
Okay.
I'm a very big Yuki fan as well. I would say Yuki hovers right around. Him and Oscar are like in contention for 3rd, but right now I'd say Oscar is my 3rd favorite. But Charles and Lewis have always been like my 2 in my top 3 since I started watching Formula 1. And so because of that, I feel like, and now that they're both going to go to the same team next
Ferrari, yeah,
year,
sure.
I'm all in on Ferrari.
I feel you. I'm very excited for next year. The Lewis moving over. I was talking about this with a friend and I realized and I think so many people are going through this as well. I was a Mercedes fan because of Lewis
Yes,
Hamilton.
same.
And yeah, and so now like that you have the realization of it not just being that Lewis is leaving, but also the way in which everything has gone down. And we've talked about it so much that we don't even, I think things have finally calmed down that people are starting to, feel like it's okay. But you realize
Right.
everything that you loved about Mercedes was Lewis's relationship with Mercedes, which then fell apart. So
Right.
it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I would admit I'm very much a driver person
Mm,
over a team. Like, if I like a driver, I will follow that driver to any team. I mean, it's so different, like, as a team sport fan versus I find it harder to form the initial connection with the team in Formula 1.
mhm.
I guess unless you are maybe there's like a national tie to a team, like if you're from Italy or something, that might
Sure.
obviously make you a Ferrari fan. I just feel like as someone coming into the sport so late in my life, I guess, as I did,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm so much more connected to the drivers than I am to the teams.
I think that's also a modern sports fan thing now. It's not just Formula 1, like, even with team sports, when you look at, like, the NBA in particular is the example I always think of, people who became fans of LeBron James were not complete Cleveland Cavalier fans. Like, when
Right.
LeBron left, a lot of people left with him and so
Right.
on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think you've got like it's a modern sports fan thing where because I think individual athletes are becoming superstars just from either marketing or from their own careers and social media allows you to be directly connected with these athletes in a deep way. I think there's like a very different way of connecting with teams where the team is the secondary aspect of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I completely agree.
I think that's the other part about it is I do wonder for you as coming in from someone who I like the way that you were like I came into it because there was something happening with tennis from the
It's
same production company.
so random.
Yeah, and like did you find that it was easier to get people into it because I would assume you got Hannah into it after
I
you
did.
yeah.
This sounds obvious maybe to some, but I think there's a big fandom connection
Mm,
to Formula 1. And I feel like it's also a sport that if you were not already a sports fan before, that's okay. It's a sport that I feel like a lot of people found who maybe weren't originally sports fans.
yeah.
Like Hannah, for example, was not a sports fan prior to being into Formula 1. This is like
Mhm.
the first sport she's really gotten into, but I feel like we met, and bonded over our love of One Direction. And she's like very much like me, passionate. Like when she gets into something, she goes fully in. I'm very much that way. And so I just knew. When I watched, I was like, she's gonna be obsessed.
Yeah.
So yes, I very much got her in. I got another friend of mine who's very similar to us. I got her into it, I got my parents into it.
Mhm.
I've gotten other people like peripherally into it who they like know what's going on. They get the gist. They follow some of the drivers on Instagram. Like, and that's all I really want. I just want that when my favorite driver gets kicked out of Formula 1, I want people to be like texting me, "Hey, heard the news. How you doing?" You know? It's kinda
Yeah,
nice.
I
It's just
do.
nice to feel seen. So, yeah, so that's been funny, and I don't if someone doesn't like Formula 1, I'm not gonna force it onto them by
Sure.
any means, but I do think, I mean, that's how fandom is, just in general. It's like you see something that you like and you're like, "Hey, saw this thing, I think you'd love it too." Um, so that's what, like, makes it fun, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think there's like such an interesting ability with Formula One. And I think part of it is kind of what we were talking about with the individual driver connection and how few athletes there are in the sport that allows it
Right.
to expand into the fandom kind of culture of Formula One in general. And I do think there's like an extreme one direction to Formula One pipeline. There's like
So extreme.
so good. Anyway, before but we could go down fandom
Oh,
studies for
we
an
definitely
extreme
could.
period of time.
100%. Yes, exactly.
Oh, I do love it. I do love seeing how many more women are getting into it. I do love seeing the Tumblr, the fan edits, the thirst cams. I think all of it
I agree.
is so great.
It's so fun. It, like, makes it so much more fun to be a fan. Like, I mean, we're both sports fans, and, like,
Mhm.
I grew up a sports fan. Like, I'm a big NFL fan, and, like, you just don't really have that. I mean, we're starting to see it more with the NFL, but, like, you just don't see it as much, or I didn't see it as much growing up, and it's just I feel like F1 is very fun as a
Yeah.
fan, and sometimes it's not always like, I don't always enjoy myself as a NFL
Mm.
fan. I'm just like, this has been put onto me since I was born, and, like, this
Yeah.
is the life chosen for me. Um, so yeah, I think it's cool how much, like, how young I feel like the fan base has gotten with
Mhm.
F1, that has kind of added some people. I mean, there's a whole other tangent we could go on, which is like
Sure.
how the gatekeeper fans don't like that aspect of it. But I think it's really cool to see.
I think it's great, and I think also the other thing is that fangirls in general make things more fun
Completely
overall.
agree.
Even if
Yes.
you don't like one of the things that I thought was so funny when I went to my first Grand Prix last year, which was for Texas. I went to the Austin Grand Prix.
Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
And one of the things I thought was hilarious was I was walking around and seeing grown men wearing t-shirts that I knew were from Etsy. Like
Yes.
they were absolutely these like fangirl edits, like putting different I have it printed out like memes on t-shirts. And they're like grown men who probably have been fans of the sport for ages. There are these rollover effects that come from fangirls getting into a sport or getting into any level of media in general. Like Succession is a great example as well of the amount of deep dive content that you're going to get, of the amount of critical analysis that you're going to get from people getting into these types of things. And then from the merch, from like candles that are scented like a Carlos Sainz win. Like there are so many little things that just genuinely expand the concept of fandom as a whole and the enjoyability of it. And so even for the people who don't like it that are gatekeeping, you're also benefiting. You're
Oh,
benefiting from
a
women getting into it.
100%, 100%. They don't always recognize it or know it
Right.
initially,
Mhm.
but it's like they're keeping are sort of keeping the sport alive in a sense, and
Mhm.
like regenerating it, which they don't, yeah, as you said, they don't know it, but they benefit from it.
Yeah, I think and I don't even know that I would say, like, keeping it alive, but I would say, like, giving it a new iteration, right? Like,
Yes, yes,
a new yeah.
exactly. Yes,
Because and it's also, like, even just the way teams are doing their social media has shifted as a way
yes,
to try to,
100%.
And so, like, that's coming
Yes.
from that type of engagement, and you are every little joke that you're seeing, like, that shift is really there from a large number of fangirls, which, like, mine is genuine, other people's are derogatory, getting
Yes.
into the sport, you know?
Completely agree. Completely
Yeah.
agree.
Awesome. Well, okay, I think we should because I know that both of us will probably go down a long, long tangent of I'm always every time I get into this, I'm like, okay, a fun little tiny tangent fact about me is that I did my graduating thesis in film school, like on the MCU, and a large chunk of it was about like the fandom element of that.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah, any conversation we get into about that, I'm like, I have an academic article to back this up. Um,
Incredible.
so
Incredible.
other we will go for hours about that, and we should talk about the race. So let's lock in. It's
Let's
time.
do it.
Race
Let's
recap.
do it.
I want to talk about a couple things that happened before the race and to
Okay.
talk about our qualifying as well. But one of the biggest things about Mexico City is the altitude change. And so for people like me that are big like tech nerds, one of the most important aspects of that is cooling the engine. And I don't know if you saw, but we saw a lot of upgrade packages, particularly for Ferrari, that were about specifically keeping that engine cool. And Ferrari appeared to have the biggest kind of change of basically just slits in the engine covers and the ability to bring that out. And the thing that was interesting about that is that you sacrifice a lot of drag. You sacrifice a lot of drag reduction. Like you're going to have more drag on the car to have those engine openings. But obviously, we did see that it very much paid off.
Very much so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was honestly, I feel like whenever we come to Mexico, I feel like no one really knows who's going to be the best, or
yeah.
they're kind of like, I don't really know who's going to be on pole. I feel like early in the weekend they were predicting McLaren was probably going to be the strongest this weekend.
Mhm.
And I just feel like you don't as you mentioned with the altitude, you actually don't know what car is going to be the best. And teams try to make changes and to adapt to it, but it doesn't always pay off. Ferraris
Absolutely.
did.
Yeah, Ferraris did. And I
Yeah.
think we also saw McLaren made some similar choices, but not as extensive as Ferrari did. And we also saw Red Bull make some changes. And then the biggest was Lewis and George would have had a floor upgrade, which was sort of not exactly an upgrade, a sort of a pivot from last week's upgrade that did not go well,
Yeah.
essentially. Um, and one thing that we did see was that even though it wasn't Kimi's fault, he did damage the floor of Lewis's car in free practice one, which was
Yeah.
a bummer.
That was very much yeah, the I mean, I love seeing all the rookies in FP1. I think it's
Mm,
amazing. I think it's great. But it is Ollie Bierman having his little these types of things. You're kind of like, oh no, this could completely derail a team's weekend, a driver. It's It's a little risky, especially when it happens.
yeah.
I don't know if this is just me, but I'm also of course they have to do it when they have to do it, but, like, part of me is like, I don't know that these things should be happening this late in the season
Mhm.
because I mean, again, like, whether it happens in race 6 or race 20, it's still the same result,
Effect,
like, it's
sure. Yeah.
yeah, but for some reason, it just feels like it's everything comes down to the wire these last few races, and so it's just sort of like, what if Lewis was fighting for the championship? Or what
Mhm.
if and then this thing happens, it's like but, I mean,
Yeah.
he's not, but unfortunately.
Isn't he always in our hearts though?
In our hearts, exactly, yes, yes,
No,
yes.
I agree with you. I will say, despite the fact that it is like required, there's a certain, for anyone who doesn't know as well, there's a certain number of free practice sessions that have to be completed by a rookie. And a lot of times it means that we get to a point this late in the season where that still has to happen. But I was surprised to see so many rookies doing so in Mexico City, which is just, as we've said, a track where bad things happen.
Yeah, I wonder if they want I don't know this, but I wonder if they feel like, "Oh, well, because there's gonna be so many rookies doing it at one time," like, it almost makes every other team feel like, "Yeah, let's have
Mm,
it be the rookie." Like, I don't know if that's real or I don't yeah, because why Mexico? Why not Austin or
sure.
wherever else? Like, yeah, that's a good question. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't know either. Obviously, those decisions are the types of things that like we just don't have
Yeah,
the information for.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I assume it has something to do also with like when you're bringing upgrade packages in, when like obviously
yeah,
for
that's a
Mercedes
good
last week
point.
they had a whole floor,
Yeah,
so
that's a good
I don't know, but I was stressed, and we did see a lot of bad results from it. We had
yeah.
also Robert Schwartzman got a 5 grid penalty for a race he'll probably never complete.
I know, that was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting to see how rookies react to their free practice session because we saw some kind of with Kimmy, I think he just truly was like, "Please let me finish. Please let me finish. Please let me finish." And he went over debris. I think I've seen a couple of people disagreeing about this, but he just went over debris that wasn't even from a car. It wasn't his fault. It did happen, but it obviously is unfortunate. Like it resulted in Lewis not having the proper upgrade. So George actually had a better floor than Lewis did for this race, but it wasn't like last time when he crashed and he put it into the wall. So I was happy to see him
Right.
finish.
Right, it's like, at least he did that.
Yeah, and then you have, the Ollie Bearman and the Alex Albon incident, I think is the biggest portion from that rookie situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have a feeling on who was at fault? Because it's kind of mixed.
I mean, it's it seemed like Ollie could have gone over more,
Mhm.
but it also seemed like Alex could have avoided it. You know, it kind of was like, I mean, it obviously ended up being just sort of a incident. No one was
Yeah.
to blame. I don't know. And maybe we'll get into this later, but I feel like Alex is a little on edge or something. I feel like
Yeah.
he's tightening up a little bit. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but I don't know. I think from initial like my initial watch, I thought I thought it was Alex's fault.
Mhm.
But then kind of re-seeing it, I thought, well, I feel like they both could have done a little bit more to avoid the situation.
I agree with you. I think from the instant of it, I was like, Alex is the one who lost control.
Yes.
So Ollie should have moved out of the way. But at the same time, it's sort of like rewatching it and seeing the decision on it. I really think they both, like you said, could have done more. So it's just unfortunate because the because Williams really just cannot continue to afford these losses. And
No.
every time I look at one of those cars where you can see where you're like, where did the wheel go?
I know.
Just
I know.
keep the wheel on the car,
I know.
please.
I feel like when it rains, it freaking pours,
Yeah,
and Alex is just in that, he's just that guy right now, like, the curse has been placed on him, and it's just like, he has just been having just difficult time after difficult time after difficult time, and I love Alex, so I it's hard to watch, honestly.
yeah, I agree. I really do love Alex, and I think you can feel him kind of tensing up a little bit with it. Maybe it's just from having competition that he has not had in at least 2 seasons. So,
Exactly.
it's frustrating and it's hard to watch, but I do hope that we can see him kind of adjust a little bit and get back into fighting form because next year is not going to be any different. He's going to be up against
No.
Carlos, which
No.
it is going to be different. It's going to be worse, I guess.
I know, I'm very curious to see how that shakes out for him because as you said, he hasn't had much competition the last couple seasons. You have Carlos who is a veteran, race winner. It feels kinda make or break for Alex in a sense, like,
Yeah.
especially with we don't know what's gonna happen to Franco, and again, we could
Yeah,
get
for sure.
into this
Yeah.
later, but, like, I just feel like it's sort of he needs to perform. He needs to perform.
I agree. And I think it's also part of what I wonder about how tense Alex has gotten is the way that Franco's come in this year
Right.
and that expectation there. And so I wonder how much of it is him being like, okay, clearly we're a team that's willing to get rid of people even though they're under contract.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's rough. The last thing from the free practice before we just quickly talk about qualifying is George putting it into the wall. I will say my favorite meme that came out of this weekend was someone posting a picture of him in the barrier with "Wow, what a parallel parking job."
He did go in
Just
very
just properly
nicely.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see that, like, if he had crashed, like, I don't know how many meters sooner, he would have gone straight into the concrete wall, like, he was lucky that he, like, crashed right at the point where he was at least, went into those barricade, whatever they call those,
Sure.
like, the soft padding, I
Mhm.
suppose, but it was not a good crash. I mean, he was
No.
in some serious pain, you could tell.
Yeah, and at the same time, I feel like George also has some of that bad luck that we've talked about with Alex, where it's just like something has gotten into his head, and that something could be a million different things. Um, it, I do think part of it is that conversation about the fact that he's not contracted after next year, and there's going to be less options for him. There are less seats open for 26.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of stress there where I worry about it, and I think he had just sort of a little bit of an attitude on the radio today as well. So I don't know what's going on with him. If it's just how he, maybe we're just seeing more of it. I don't know,
I
but
feel like for
rough.
the Mercedes guys too, like in the summer, I would say like June, July, they were performing really well. Obviously, Lewis gets a couple wins,
Mhm.
George got a win. Like I felt like things were trending upwards. And then I feel like the last few months it's just they kind of gone back or
Yeah,
the other teams have gone forward. But I feel like both Lewis and George have kind of been a little bit discouraged by the car and the team's overall performance, and you can kinda see that, I feel like in both Lewis and George's, like, radio comments and just even, I mean, Lewis last week being like, "God, this is so far back," when he started the race.
Yeah.
It's just like, they're kind of like, "Okay, like, I'm ready for this." I wouldn't be surprised if they're ready for the season to be over.
I agree. I think Lewis more than anyone is ready to move
To
on.
move on. Yeah.
Just to be
Agreed.
just free that man. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like
Exactly. He is
and to be
desperate.
honest, free me as well. I'm ready to go.
I know, but I I don't know, I mean, I feel I'm like, I'm ready, but I'm also a little nervous about Lewis
Mm.
at Ferrari, like and also as a Charles and Lewis fan, it's sort of like, "Oh god, is this gonna be" I just don't know what to expect, frankly.
I and I could be proven 100% wrong, but I feel like for the first time, it's the type of driver pairing that I'm actually not worried about. I
Okay,
feel like
good.
there was a conversation about it. I think Charles and Lewis have a large amount of respect for each other
Very much so.
in a way that I don't see in a lot of other teammates. I don't see that from George currently. I don't see that from Carlos for Charles. I think
Mhm.
there's like a deep respect in the sense of like Charles looking at it and saying Lewis Hamilton is genuinely one of the greatest of all time and talks very frequently about how much he can learn from him versus I think George looks at Lewis as someone that he looks at him as direct competition, which you should when it's your teammate, but there's a level of I don't want to say lack of respect, but I do think to some degree there is a sort of lack of respect for that. And you can see that tension kind of growing between the two of them. And it has maybe dissipated a little bit knowing that Lewis is leaving. But George doesn't have that same sense of, I don't want to say sense of awe that Charles necessarily does, but
Mhm.
there's like a you can see a clear respect from a lot of drivers on the grid for both Lewis and for Fernando as like we watched you growing up like I want to be just like you. There's a level of that and I think you see that from Charles and I think also Fred has a clear plan for the future of Ferrari and that plan is starting to pay off. And so I think the only time I could see that driver pairing becoming really disastrous is if Lewis were to win his 8th championship and then not retire. That's where I can see Charles being like, "Okay, it's my turn. Like I feel like it's my turn." um,
Right.
and so, but I think next year and maybe 26, depending on where we're at with like Lewis's standing itself, I think he'll be fine. We'll see though.
Let's cross my fingers and toes.
I'm like, I think they're both gentlemen and they seem like really nice guys, and I think everything will be
Race
fine.
race 1 is gonna be like
They're
carnage. Yeah.
just like crash, crash, crash.
I'll
Yeah.
message you. I'll be like, you said."
You're like, you had really high hopes. I'm like, look, they're just maybe that's the fandom in me too. That's me being like, I just think everybody's gonna be
I
really nice to
I
each other.
I yeah, it reminds me of, like, that Mean Girls line where they're like, "I just want us all to be" I can't remember what she says, but, just to
I
get
just want us all to
along
get
and
along. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. No, I mean, I hope so too, and as a
Yeah.
person who doesn't really wanna have to, like I don't really wanna pick a side. I
Mm,
just kinda wanna, like, root for them, and
yeah.
I'm worried that's, I think, what I'm worried about. I'm worried that I'm gonna have to pick a side,
Yeah.
and I don't wanna pick a side. It's like my 2 kids, Just
Yeah.
get along and don't make me pick a side.
I agree with you. I do think we have the potential to see the type of relationship we were seeing with like Lewis and Valtteri, where they're both really great drivers, performing very well. Every once in a while, they let the second driver win a race, and they make their way up into that dominance situation. I would love to see that, but it could be bad. It could. We never know.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a lot more evenly matched than Lewis and
Yeah.
Valtteri.
Yeah. I do think Valtteri doesn't get enough credit necessarily for the level of driving that he was doing and
Very
also
solid.
and also quite frankly how many races and situations where he did sacrifice his own race to
Yes.
help Lewis. So
Yes,
it'll be interesting to see kind of what type of relationship we see from the two of them and if we see it more balanced out as opposed to more asking one to sacrifice for the other type of situation. But
for sure.
I don't know. I have high hopes, can tell you that.
Me too, me too, me too.
Outside of practice, we do have a couple of moments from qualifying that we should just hit on. One, I was happy to see Alex make it out into a higher qualifying position, and I was bummed to see Franco not make it into Q3, but I was happy to see Alex kind of moving a little bit forward.
I know. Didn't Franco get out in Q1? I
Yeah, he
was
was out
kinda
in Q1.
surprised by that a bit. Yeah, I was happy too just because I feel like there's been a couple weeks, of Franco outperforming Alex,
Mhm.
and it just was. I mean, I'm a huge Franco fan. Do not get me
Yeah.
wrong. Like he has won me over heart and soul. I love him, but it was nice to see Alex. Now, didn't pay off, not so much, but it was nice to see. I
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, same. I've loved seeing Franco move in the way that he's moved, and quite frankly, I am a little bummed, or more than a little bummed, that he won't have a seat next year. But I
We don't
also,
know. We
yeah,
don't
that's
know.
true. We'll definitely get into that too, because I have some
Yeah,
questions for you on that. But
please.
um, but yeah, I think I have been worried about Alex and the level of performance that Franco's brought to the table, and so it was nice to see him a little bit. Obviously, didn't pay off, but nice to see him a little bit more on pace during qualifying. So
I agree. I agree.
yeah, the last moment from qualifying that we should talk about is Checo, because
Yeah.
I felt really stressed for him going into Mexico, and the stress never abated, because I mean, the only thing that literally could have been worse would have been last year, which was a full crash and just a disaster
See,
situation.
okay. I actually kind of disagree
Okay,
because I feel like at least with last year, it wasn't good. Obviously, it wasn't good,
sure.
but there was always sort of like because okay, I feel like I would rather see my driver DNF in lap 1 and have the race be over than just be racing in the back
That's
and
fair. Yeah,
have a very and it's almost like more painful in a way. Like I don't know. I just it was a little bit harder to watch. It was hard to watch Checo this whole weekend, and there's something
yeah.
about kind of like, if it happens quick, it sucks, but, like, then the pain's sort of over.
Yeah, there's a
Um
level of, like, prolonged embarrassment.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah,
that's
and I just
fair.
felt like it was just like, "Oh gosh," and it wasn't just like, "Oh, qualifying was bad, but then the race was good," or vice versa. It was like, it was just all
Bad.
rough. It was just
Yeah,
all really rough.
I agree, yeah, and I think you make a great point, which is essentially like, okay, at least last race, it was over, it was disastrous, and also to some degree, Checo was able to kind of blame someone else.
Yes, 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 exactly.
And so, like, this one,
Exactly.
it's just like, "Bud."
Well, he can kind of I mean, I think he's tried to blame other people this weekend, or he's had
Yeah.
some he's definitely like then we can I'm sure we'll get into all of that too, but,
Yeah, sure.
um, yeah, it just and I think for Checo too this season especially, it's like there's just been relentless conversation about whether or not he should be in this sport every single weekend since, like, Monaco.
Yeah.
And it's just continuous, 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 and he really hasn't shown us anything to make us except for Baku, even though but then he DNF'd,
Yeah.
but, like, there hasn't been any sort of like, "Oh, well, at least he's done this,"
I think
and
that's
so
the
it's
struggle, yeah.
yeah,
There's just nothing, there's been no moment, and I'm frustrated by it, quite frankly. Like, I would love to see him turn out and say at least, like, "Okay, here's what I'm doing," but when you look at the stats, Max is outscoring Checo by 41% this season. 41%. Like, it's that's just outrageous, and when you're looking at how far Red Bull has fallen, we've got Red Bull essentially, there's I don't even think there's a chance of them coming in second for Constructors Championship.
no, it's
And
done.
the fact that Ferrari and McLaren are going to be the ones fighting for constructors, at least for a period of time, we had a McLaren sort of creeping up on Red Bull. But if Checo had been performing well for the beginning of the season, there wouldn't really have even been that conversation. And that's the thing that is just so shocking, I think, overall.
Yeah, it's sort of indefensible at this point from Red Bull, like, I'm totally for a team backing their driver. I'm totally for a team I am not necessarily a fan of a midseason swap, like,
Mhm.
I am a fan of allowing a driver to finish through the year and all that stuff, but, like, I just don't know how Red Bull can defend this performance and keep and continue on like this, especially when they're a team who in the past was so ruthless. They were ruthless with
Yeah.
Daniel Ricciardo this season,
Yeah.
but it's like, and that's a whole, we don't have to get into that today. But like, yeah, so it's just, I just don't know how they can keep going on like this. It's what, the definition of insanity,
Mhm.
doing the same thing, expecting a different result. It's just, it's like, yeah, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is what you're gonna get. Like,
Yeah.
this is how it's, he hasn't. I don't know. It's just interesting too how he does so well in the beginning of the season, and then it just kind of like, I don't know where it goes wrong. And
Mhm.
Max is obviously like generational talent, one of the best ever. And I don't think anyone expects him to be beating Max or even matching Max, but
Yeah.
it's at the point where it's
I
really not good.
I will say, unfortunately for him, I do think the expectation is for you to be up there next to Max, though, because it's not
Yes.
just that Max is such a great driver. They had a rocket ship for the first half of the season. And
Yes.
so like when you look at the level, okay, fine, Max is going to be able to drive better than most people that you put in a second seat with him. But there's also times where Max has DNF'd. There's times where Max has driven like a maniac, as in today. Um,
Right.
there are situations where when your teammate gets a 20-second
Yes,
penalty
exactly.
and you still don't beat him,
Right.
how is that
Yeah.
possible? You're in equal machinery. I don't know.
Right. I mean, and we know, I mean, look at Oscar this weekend, right? He had a
Right.
mistake, he gets out in Q1. Like these things happen. Like drivers
Sure.
have mistakes. They'll have times where like they don't perform as well as they should. That happens. But as we saw from Oscar, it's like I don't know where he finished today, or I don't remember where he finished, like P7 or something like that, or maybe not exactly. I don't know. But anyway, he had a decent enough drive to get
He
points.
finished 8th. There we
8.
go.
Okay. And it's like, okay, yeah, not a great Saturday, but he at least got some points,
Yeah.
and that's a one-off type of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you feel this way too. I feel like we're just like reiterating ourselves over and over again. It's like the same, and I'm kind of just tired of having the conversation. Like I just I'd love for either Checo to improve his performance so we don't have to keep constantly
Yeah.
talking about him all the time,
Sure.
or for Red Bull to make a change. And I think Checo, I've said this 1,000 times too, like Checo is a good driver. Checo
Mhm.
deserves to be on the F1 grid. I think his best performances though are when he is in a midfield car and he can like get the max out of that car. I just think that's when he does his best work.
Mhm.
Frankly, I think some drivers do better in a fast car. I think other drivers are better in that midfield area. And so I feel like maybe he just needs to kind of go back to a place where the pressure is not as intense.
Yeah, I do think ironically, I think Max has a similar problem where it's like there's an emotional level of or there's a level of emotions getting in the way of your drive, right? Checo every week has been the subject of how dare you continue to drive in this sport and just a constant conversation. But I think one of the things about Formula 1 that so many people wanna talk about is like, "Oh, this person only has their seat because of XYZ." And the
Yeah,
thing with Checo right now is that, okay, it's the sponsorship money that you bring in, it's the fan base that you bring in from Mexico, it's all of these different financially related things that are the, sort of conversation about why he belongs in this seat or why he still has his seat when he doesn't deserve it. And I think the thing that people don't think about, right, is that every driver on the grid has a reason that has nothing to do with their actual driving capabilities. The difference is that you only hear about those reasons when drivers are not performing to the best of their abilities. And so
exactly.
Checo just keeps giving everyone an excuse to just bring up the money. And it's like, I get frustrated with it because I'm like, yeah, of course he has so much sponsorship money. That's why he has a seat. That's the same reason why a number of other people have their seats. Like Lance Stroll has his seat because his dad owns the team. Like there are reasons across the board that come up, but those reasons only ever come up when someone's not performing well.
Right. We said this last week. Like Lance, for example, we just haven't really talked about Lance very much because he's not been bad. He's not been
Mhm.
great. He's just been
Yeah.
fine. But we are not talking about Lance. He's not getting brought up. No one's talking about how dare he have this seat, even though, because
Right.
to your point, he's not performing drastically worse than
Right.
Fernando. He's not crashing out, and so we don't talk about it. And that's very true. But it's like, and also, I think too, how sports goes, it's like we love a hero and we love a villain, and I
Mhm.
think it's like we love to prop people up, but we also love to focus on the people who are not doing well and
Right.
like latch onto that too. And Checo unfortunately has just been that guy this season. Like that's just the narrative that's been created over the course of the season.
Absolutely. And I think also it's just like the other way that we should talk about this too is when we talk about turn one, which is the worst. Every year there's drama. It's never good, and you have to be sat. And if anyone's gonna miss the beginning of the race, I would recommend not doing that for Mexico City.
Yeah.
But when we look at it, we've got Yuki and Alex out, which then allows Max to take the leap, and we take the lead, and then we have 5 laps under a safety car. And I think that Yuki and Alex crash was the most frustrating because again, it was a situation where technically both drivers were fine in what they did. Like Alex should have moved if he had been able to, but there was another car on his side, and Yuki had the right to make the move that he made, but he should have seen that there wasn't enough space for him to do it. And that is another one where I'm like, this sucks because I really would like to see Yuki in conversation for the Red Bull seat. And it's one of those things where I do wonder, like, is he driving this way because he thinks there's a possibility of that seat and he's trying to get up there? Are we playing this constant psychological game with our entire Red Bull stable of just promising, dangling this second seat in front of everyone, and nobody seems to be able to drive to the best of their abilities when that's the case? Is that the same problem that we had with Daniel Ricciardo? Like, it's just so stressful. And the second Yuki crashed, I was literally sitting, I was just holding my head. I was like, please don't let that be true.
I was so depressed. I mean, he crashed in qualifying, which was disappointing. He
Yeah.
crashes in the race, and I feel like he had a lot of pace this weekend, and this was really a chance for him to, like, prove himself, and I don't know if you heard that he's going to get the Red Bull test at the end of the
Yeah.
year in Abu Dhabi, and I mean, I don't know that that really means anything. I think it kinda might be just, like, trying to keep Honda happy, but I with all the stuff going on with Red Bull and Checo underperforming, it's sort of like I've always said, like, Yuki deserves a chance. Yuki
Yeah.
deserves a chance in that seat. Um, and again, like, with the way and that's why I also just don't understand why, like, more changes didn't happen within the Red Bull system earlier because with the whole like contract stuff with Red Bull and with VCarb, like you had the flexibility to like essentially test people in each seat and then you can bring them back down, you can move forward. So it's not like you're like locked into something forever if it doesn't work out.
Right.
Um so I don't know. And for Alex to have the crowd, I just was like I was really sad. Really
I
sad.
I actually in, like, my group chat, I just remember literally typing, like, "Leave me alone." Like, this isn't like, it's just not
Yeah.
happening. But I think, one thing that I'm curious about with the Yuki test and Honda pushing for it now after all this time, what I do wonder, or my, I guess, conspiracy theory to some degree, is that Aston Martin is getting Honda in 26. So Honda only has one more year with Red Bull. Red Bull is going to be bringing in Ford and their own powertrain moving forward. So it'll be a kind of, well, their powertrain is already involved, but basically Ford and Red Bull will be running the engine, and Honda will go to Aston Martin. And my sort of conspiracy theory feeling about it is we've heard Honda and Yuki both basically say like would love to continue the relationship. It's just a matter of there being a seat. And I'm
Mm.
hoping that if Yuki gets this Red Bull test, I think it's less about him moving into the Red Bull seat and more about proving to Aston Martin that he is a valuable driver, that there could then be a conversation, especially if Fernando continues to sort of just give this lackadaisical performance. Um, that's the best word I can use for it. I just think he doesn't, he's not doing anything wrong, but he's certainly not doing anything spectacular. Um,
Yeah, the
and I
Aston
think,
Martin has been
yeah,
rough this last few weeks.
really has, and
Not a
I
great
do
car.
wonder, no, God, not at
No,
all.
no.
And I do wonder how much of it is them saying like, okay, Fernando quote unquote signed a lifetime contract, which I assume has more to do with what he does when he gets out of the car than how long he's going to stay in the car, though
Sure.
God only knows with that man. But I'm hopeful that it's Red Bull saying, "Fine, we'll give you the test. You'll have the numbers." And then I doubt that they're gonna move him into the Red Bull seat as much as I would love to see that, but I think it's more about Honda having the data and the proof to tell Aston Martin, "We want to take one of these seats and give them to Yuki." Whether that
Right.
is then, like, saying, "Okay, it's time for Fernando to become some sort of associate of Aston Martin,
Ambassador or something like
ambassador,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
or mentor, I don't care, give him some sort of title to make him happy, but, like, move him in, and then, or if it's Lance Stroll saying, like, "I wanna do something different, I want a new hobby, a new fun thing to do." Um, either way. But I'm hopeful that that's what's going on because I don't see Red Bull keeping Yuki after Honda leaves,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have well, how should I phrase this? I just am enjoying Yuki while we have him on the grid,
Yeah.
and I'm not putting a lot of faith in anything
Yeah.
when it comes to Yuki.
My hope and feeling is that even if it's not in Formula One, Honda will find a series for Yuki to be in. So I feel like there will be more
Bring
Yuki
Yuki
to
to
come.
IndyCar. Bring
Oh
Yuki to
God.
IndyCar.
Let me tell you, that's one thing that I am not sure is good for any of us.
No, it's good for me. Then I can see M race all the time.
So true. Yeah, I just you can see him yell. He'll definitely be yelling. I will say one thing. I would be interested to see how Yuki behaved in the atmosphere of NASCAR, where they
Oh my
allow
god.
drivers to physically fight each other.
Incredible. Incredible.
We'll see. We'll see.
I need Yuki driving for like 30 more years.
Oh my gosh, me too. He's such a young soul. He's got it.
He's
He's got it
my
in him.
favorite. Love
I
him.
really do love him.
Me
And
too.
he really has matured. This race was I felt like this crash for him was not the same level of crash we've seen from him before,
Oh,
which is like
no.
this
No, no, no,
emotional.
no.
It was just him making
Yeah.
a strong move.
Not his fault. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So fingers crossed. Hopefully. We'll see. The other thing that we have to talk about from the beginning is Checo's response to his 5-second penalty for a false start, where he my favorite radio message actually of the entire race was, "Nope, it was a great start."
I mean, it was a great start. Like, he wasn't wrong. It was great. He got to 13th, but he was way not in his position.
Just like fully, just like completely out of the box, which again is one of those things where I'm like, no one noticed that. No one was like, "Hey, buddy, you might need to reverse a little bit."
Yeah, I don't know. Very
No,
strange. I mean, yeah, it was because I was shocked when I saw that he was in P13. I was like, "Damn, Checo, that
yeah,
was a great start."
right,
And I also felt like 5 seconds is not a ton. I felt like it I don't know. I don't know if it should have been 5 or 10 seconds. It just seems like 5 seconds is not a huge penalty if you could, like, really get an advantage like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, which
But
it was clearly,
it
I mean,
was.
when you look at the replay, like, obviously, starting from not where you're supposed to start from is always gonna be, obviously better for you, but I
Right.
will say it sucks for him to have not noticed that he had done that because he did make some good passing moves,
Yeah.
like, it was good driving, it just also was driving from a significant advantage. So,
Yes. Yeah, because
um
we've also seen some people this season, like, I think Lando and I think actually Daniel, they had
mm,
penalties, like false start penalties, but it was more of like something happened within, like, the car that caused, like, them to move a bit sooner than they should have. Like, it wasn't that
yeah,
they were out of the grid, it was just, like, something happened with the car.
yeah.
So I kinda thought that was maybe what happened with Checo, and then when I saw the replay, I was like, "Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
It's
Nope, not
just
the case."
he just sort of was like, "I think I'll start from, a couple inches ahead. Like, why not? What's the
I'm starting
problem?"
P17 and a half actually.
I just
That's
feel better
or
about
whatever.
that.
Yeah. I mean, hey, whatever.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
Exactly.
Um, the other ridiculous, hilarious thing that ultimately became not a problem, but just was very funny to me was that Charles was being forced to drink his water because
Oh,
there was
yes.
it's just fully forcibly hydrated. I was like,
Yes.
fingers
I
crossed. He's like, I
mean,
have to
it's
drink even when I
good.
don't want to. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, do it. Get some water in you. And I was like, you know what? I also need some water. I should probably be forcibly hydrated from the stress of this race.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, which I'm sure was a problem going forward. They wouldn't have had time to fix that. So he did his best
He did
to,
his
I guess,
best.
you know,
Drink as much of it as he
drown.
could. Yeah.
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 um, and then we get into one of the best moves from the race, which is Carlos taking the lead back. And I was so impressed by that move. I thought it was so smooth. One might even say that it was a smooth operation. Uh, but other than that, I think that is really where we start to see the downfall of Max for this race. I quite frankly was like, just my notes just say, Max, are you well? You are losing your mind. Like the amount of I know everyone's gonna say like the return of Mad Max and everything like that, but it just something about Max that I think separates him from being in the conversation of greatest of all time versus just a really good driver is his response to stressful situations. He
Mm.
drives so emotionally and he cannot seem to get that back on track. He drives where he is just, I mean, we saw it today. It's a 20-second penalty for the honestly quite dangerous driving that he was pulling out against Lando today.
Yeah, Max got away with what he got away with in Austin, right? No
Mhm,
penalty, there's a whole back and forth, blah, 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 blah. And I feel like today, Max because Max got away with it in Austin, I think he kind of felt like, "Well, I can get away with it, or I could potentially get away with that kind of driving today."
mhm.
Um, and, Max is an incredible driver, he's a fearless driver, he is I mean, the list goes on and on and on. He has so many great attributes as a driver, but I think when he has to race other people and he's in a situation where, yeah, he's not in the lead or he's having to fight for a position, he can be a little messy sometimes, and we haven't seen that with Max in a long time because he's just been P1 and then sails out in the front and doesn't have to really do much, but just be fast, which he's great at that.
Right.
But it does seem like now that Red Bull has taken some steps backwards and he is having to fight for these positions and having to race other drivers, that is sort of coming back out again with him, and I don't know. I also feel like the stewarding just in general this weekend has been I mean, not just this weekend. This season
Just
has been very
sure.
inconsistent, and even later on in the race, certain incidents between drivers that didn't get penalized. It's like there just needs to be a lot more consistency with the drivers, and it's kind of like you're like a kid or something. If you allow your kid to get away with something, like, then they're just gonna be like, "Well, I can get away with this, so I'm gonna keep doing this."
Yeah.
And so you kinda have to, like, lay down the law, and then either they'll get punished or they'll adapt or they'll change their ways, and I feel like the stewarding in general kinda needs to be, like, more consistency across the board, um, so that drivers will be forced to change how they race.
Yeah, something I think is interesting in that conversation. I don't know if you've seen Christina Lee Mace. She's been on the podcast before. You guys probably remember her for back in, I think she was on Canada recap. I could be totally wrong about that, but I think that's right. But she posted today saying that like in every other sport, we're able to publicly shame and boo the refs for the calls that they make, and Formula 1 and motorsports in general is one of the only sports where you can't do that, and it feels like they probably need to be booed from time to time about the way that they're making these calls, and
Agreed.
I'm curious about your feeling on that since you are also a team sports fan.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think it's interesting how there's not, like, consistent stewarding
Mm,
across a season, especially considering how I shouldn't say so subjective, but, like, it's kind of like any sport where I don't know if this is gonna even, like if I can even compare it, but I just feel like with F1, the rules have to be judged the same way every single time because the punishment is I feel like it's harsher than, like, in basketball, you get a foul, you know?
sure.
If a referee calls this thing a foul, but doesn't call that thing a foul, okay, like, that's unfortunate, we boo, that's a foul or whatever, but, like, the game goes on, it kinda just continues on, whereas in Formula 1, it's a difference between, like, getting points and not getting points can come down to 5 seconds, 10-second penalties, like, these things matter, and that then dictates so much else within the teams and the drivers, like, I don't know if this is making sense. What I'm trying
No,
to
it
say
definitely does,
is
yeah.
that, like, it just I feel like the if you're gonna call a certain thing a penalty in one race, then that incident or that action, if it happens in a different race, should be called the same way in the following race because it just should be. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. I don't get why they haven't changed.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think is interesting is like we did kind of see a result of that this weekend in the way that drivers responded to the way they were driving. So essentially last weekend this precedent was set that like if you break the way that Max did and you just basically don't, so that you can say that you were ahead at the apex, you're not going to get a penalty. And then we saw a lot of drivers basically doing the same thing this weekend, basically saying like, okay, well, it wasn't a problem last week, so you can't make it a problem for me, which then ultimately resulted in a little bit more dangerous driving from everyone this weekend.
Exactly.
And so I think with that, it's like, okay, yes, like partially, yes, I agree they need to keep everything consistent, but also I think when they make these decisions that are just objectively bad, they need to also then say, we did something that was the wrong call. Moving forward, if you do this, it's going to be a penalty.
Yes, yes, and be very clear about that,
Yeah,
and, um, yeah, and listen, like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I am some F1 expert who can determine whether or not like, I'm a just a armchair steward, I suppose. So, like,
sure.
but I yeah, and I think as we saw today, like, it's going to potentially lead to more just yeah, dangerous driving and
Yeah.
incidents happening and people losing parts of their car and going off and I don't know. It's kinda like they gotta decide what they want. Do they want to just let the drivers race and be a little bit more loose, or do you wanna be strict? Like,
Yeah.
you kinda gotta make a decision.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, and I think, like, the other big issue is this movement where it's like, okay, now you've got Max at this point where now we're giving him a 20-second penalty, which is pretty harsh, obviously. It's 10 seconds and 10 seconds for both the pushing him off the track and passing him off track and gaining an advantage. And so I think, like, when you look at it, it is hard to say that he shouldn't have gotten a harsher penalty for the behavior that he had on track today because there was contact drawn, it was just kind of out of control, and I, with Max, wasn't really sure why he felt the need to drive that way because there was plenty of race left to have basically just let Lando make the move and then make a move after, unless he was so certain that the
Sure.
car couldn't do that. So I don't know, he was kind of just back into this mode of, like, chaos is the it was just truly chaotic driving where you understand that it's technically a move that he thinks he's making, but it's so obviously illegal and dangerous that there's no way that you could think that the stewards are not going to give you a penalty for that.
Exactly. Exactly. I
So,
completely agree.
I will say with the 20-second penalty, obviously he still managed to get back up into the points, which was once again impressive, and you can't take anything away from that. Um, it's just a question of I think sometimes I wonder with him what kind of driver he actually wants to be because he talks when he's at the front of the grid driving at the capacity that he's driving, he talks about being bored. And he talks about like wanting real competition. And then when real competition comes for a little bit, he's excited about it. But then we see a level of just sort of, and we saw this before. This is not new behavior for Max. We saw this when he was in a championship battle with Lewis for a large period of time. He drives in a way that can be considered dangerous, or you could consider it being at the absolute limit of the rules.
Yeah.
And I do wonder for him, like, ultimately what kind of driver it is that he wants to be. Do you want to be the type of driver that wins without any conversation of dirty driving, or do you want to be a driver that wins at all costs, even if that means potentially people view it as cheating?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's gonna be really interesting. I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like he's going to win the championship this year. I just don't
Yeah.
think it's gonna I just it's not gonna happen. I don't think anyone's going to or Lando, I don't think he's gonna catch up to him. But I think next season is going to be very interesting in like the lore of Max Verstappen for his career and stuff because he's really at this I mean, he'll be 27, so like prime age as an F1 driver, probably a four-time, right? Four-time world champion at
Yeah,
that
for time.
point.
Mhm.
And the Red Bull is not the top car. Like, it's just probably not going to be.
Yeah.
And I'll be very curious to see how he handles that in the terms of the championship, in terms of like the team as a whole. Um, I think it's gonna be fascinating to watch how just that unfolds for him because I could very easily see him being frustrated with everything and saying like, "I wanna leave."
Mhm.
Or maybe it's a point in time where he's like, "Hey, okay, we're gonna rebuild this back to where we were before," and he's really gonna lock in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's gonna be a flashpoint, so to speak, of
Yes,
that
yes.
type of moment. And I do agree. I think that Max is going to win the championship this year, but I actually think it's just by fault of McLaren, not by merit of him actually winning,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And I also think there's just, like, a lot of we're seeing this, like, Carlos wins a race, Charles wins a race, Lando wins a race. There's just a
Yeah.
lot of drivers taking off points from each other. There's not like a very clear second driver who is coming. I mean, Lando
Yeah.
technically, I guess, by points, but not so much in performance on track.
Agreed.
And so that's all benefiting Max at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Um, well, to talk about Ferrari a little bit, I will say that Carlos, I kind of have a balance on Carlos right now because I thought he drove very well. I was very impressed. But at the same time, I think he has had an interesting reaction to the fact that he's not going to be at Ferrari next year. And I think it's just quite honestly it's been interesting to see people's reaction to it. I saw a lot of conversation today of people saying that Ferrari made the wrong choice in taking Lewis over Carlos and that Carlos proved that today. And not to be belittling to anyone's opinion about anything, I do find it fascinating that anyone could have that opinion when you're talking about a 7-time world champion versus a 2-time at that point race winner. It's just not the same conversation. And I think also the other part that everyone seems to forget is that Carlos's whole situation, including the way he's talking about it now, which after he took pole was talking about it being bittersweet because he believes that he's been a big part of getting Ferrari up to being a championship contender, is the fact that the only reason Carlos doesn't have a seat is not just because Lewis wanted to move. It's because Carlos was offered a year extension and he said no, and he continued to push for more, which is the same thing that kept him from staying in a top 3 team for next year when he was looking for a contract after he knew that he wouldn't have one. It's that everybody was willing to give him 1 year and he was refusing to take that. And so it, just because you have bad judgment on your own career doesn't mean that everybody made a bad decision taking a better, frankly, on paper, 100% better option.
Right. Right. And I feel like with Lewis, I mean, as we said earlier, like, yes, obviously Lewis has proven himself obviously on track.
Right.
He's a 7-time world champion. He's an amazing driver. But what Lewis Hamilton brings to a team is so much more than just his driving ability. Like,
Yes.
he is Lewis Hamilton, And that carries a lot of weight. And I think Carlos Sainz is a great driver. I think he is a
Yeah.
solid driver. But he's not a Lewis Hamilton, and that's okay. No, literally nobody else on the grid is. So
Yeah.
so there's no shame in that. But he's not. Anyone, I mean, I shouldn't say anyone on the grid would be replaced by Lewis, probably not Max, but like
It's a
I
conversation though.
it's a
I mean, I think
conversation.
yeah.
It's a conversation. But so there's no shame in it. And I actually think Carlos going to Williams, I think is a smart move for his overall career because I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off of him
Mhm.
for a couple years and we don't know how he's going to fare against Alex, but like
Yeah.
I think it's if he wants longevity in Formula 1, and I'm sure he'd say obviously he wants to be a world champion, not just be a driver who drives in Formula 1 for a long
Sure.
time. But I do think it's a good chance for him to prove himself in a team that is like fighting to become a more consistent point scoring team, beat Alex, and then you put yourself in a position to potentially go back to a top team should somebody not perform or Aston Martin make a change,
Yeah.
whoever. But like you just have to you got to take what's available to you. And he clearly valued longevity and having a contract that is a lot more stable than something that's like 1 year. And what if it doesn't work out? And, which again, I
Yeah.
don't fault him. There's 20 seats in Formula One. Like you got to be smart with how you play the game. And he has been, I feel like, over the course of his career. I always say he's the anti Daniel Ricciardo. Like he
Mm.
goes to teams and it works out really well. Daniel was kind of the opposite, but like
Yeah.
they both went to the same teams too, which was weird, except for Ferrari. Yeah, so I think he's like made good judgment and like made good moves. But again, like fandom creates bias, as we said. And like if
Sure.
you're just a diehard Carlos Sainz fan, like you're just gonna ride for your guy. And
Yeah.
I can't fault that at the end of the day. Like I'm that way too.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing with Carlos's win that I did want to point out that I think maybe it was just grating on my nerves a little bit, and I think it did for me knock a little bit of my excitement for his win off was the number of radio messages that he had of being like, please tell Charles to slow down. I was like, it's still a race. You are aware of that, right? Like I every time he got on the radio, I was like, like Carlos Sainz remains shocked that he's in a car race. Like yes, of course your teammate's coming up behind you and that's going to happen. And one of the things that wasn't aired on F1 TV, or I don't think Sky Sports, but I was on the F1 TV feed, is the fact that they were constantly telling Charles to slow down. Like every time he started to
Mm.
close the gap, he was told to lift and coast. the argument, we don't know why necessarily. There could have been something like cooling related. There could have been something else that is not just about Carlos being given a win. So I'm not saying that Ferrari told Charles to slow down to let Carlos win the race. I am saying I'm tired of anyone in any capacity whining about their teammate still racing them.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, we obviously don't know what was talked about prior to the race. Like, we don't
Sure.
know what the teams told Carlos and Charles, and like, maybe they talked about that before the race and Charles wasn't following the orders properly. I don't know. But
Mhm.
yeah, I agree. I'm always in favor of teams allowing teammates to just go at it.
Yeah.
That's what I am in favor of.
I agree. I think like um it's it's one of those things where like again with the Mercedes battle today, it was nice to watch them actually race. And again, they were able to do so because there was no chance of either of them
Yeah.
catching up to get
They
a
were
podium.
in their own little battle.
Yeah, they just had a pocket on both sides of them that
Yep.
allowed them to sort of race. And so, like, that kind of stuff I love watching. I love
Yeah.
at the same time, was everyone racing to the best of their capabilities because they were racing their teammate? Definitely not. There were definitely moves that I think would have been a little bit more dangerous to have made that would have been made if it weren't if it weren't against your own teammate that you could potentially crash out.
Right.
Um, so that I do think is partially there too. But it was nice. It was nice to watch a little battle. It was
I
nice to
agree.
watch it happen.
I
I don't
completely
know.
agree. Love it.
And yeah, and then the last, or not last, but just a couple of other things I want to talk about. One, I have to say, Liam, there's something we have to talk about with Liam, which is the fact that he passed Checo and gave him the middle finger while driving.
Yes, he
And
did.
as someone who has been championing, like just so excited about Liam, I was really disappointed in it, quite frankly.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up because I have a couple things to say about this. The first thing is it is interesting to me how in 2 weekends in Formula 1, Liam has pissed off Fernando Alonso and Checo.
Yeah,
Like, it doesn't seem like he's making friends with a lot of the veteran F1 drivers. I don't know if that has anything to do with what's happening. I don't know if it's just on track action. I don't know what's going on, but they
yeah,
don't seem super thrilled. I also think this is interesting. Someone brought this up in our I when I was recording our episode, I asked our listeners for questions and somebody wrote this in. I thought it was really interesting. They said, basically Red Bull's whole excuse for not wanting Yuki in the second seat at Red Bull is because he's too emotional. He's
mm,
too emotional. He's too hot-headed. Liam flipping off Checo, is he gonna be considered to be too emotional? Is he gonna be considered to be too, whatever? Like, it's interesting how that narrative has built around Yuki. Now, obviously, Yuki has been racing for a lot longer and whatever, but I'm sort of like, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question.
I think it's hard because there are a lot of factors that could be brought up when it comes to the fact that Yuki gets that narrative, and
100%.
I think it's a factor that happens in Formula 1 overall, and I think with Yuki in particular, there has always been a narrative around him that he's only there because Honda wants him there,
Yes,
and
exactly.
and I think that sucks because I think Yuki overall, actually, what I will say, Yuki at the beginning, absolutely 100% very emotional, very chaotic,
Yeah,
100%
well,
screaming
for
on the
sure.
radio. Like
100%. 100%. Yes.
like
Yes.
one of my favorite clips of him is him complaining about having to work out like as though he's not a professional athlete.
I mean,
It's
when he yelled at his engineer and said, "No, shut up. I know, shut up."
yeah,
Like, I laugh, and I think that's hilarious, but also like, okay, maybe you shouldn't say that to, like, your team and whatever, it's not the best
sure.
behavior.
But at the same time, like it's hard because you look at it and you're like, okay, but Max's radio behavior is not great. Um
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
so
Exactly.
it feels like Red Bull's open to emotional behavior from certain people and not from others, I guess would be
Right.
the argument there.
Right.
So I don't know. I think Liam flipping off Checo in Mexico when there's so much of a conversation of Checo's seat being at risk. I just last week I was on train like what's wrong with Fernando? this week I'm starting to, you're like, choose
Yeah.
choose a coincidence, but
Yes.
three's a pattern.
Yes.
If one more person
Yes.
comes out and is like, I hate this dude.
Yeah. Who's gonna be the next one? Maybe Nico Hulkenberg. I'm gonna guess him next week.
Oh, I like that.
I'm just thinking of
Yeah,
like an older driver. Lewis Hamilton,
absolutely.
maybe too.
Yeah, maybe. Honestly, I think Lewis would be way too kind about it, but I think there's just
I
this
don't
level
know.
of
I
like
don't know. Lewis might have some sort of like snarky, like I could see him kind of
quietly
having like a
shady.
little, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just the same way he was where like they were asking him about the penalty for or the lack of penalty for Max last
Right.
week, where he was sort of like, it's
Right.
interesting that everyone's talking about it now because it was happening to me for
Yes.
years. It's
Yes.
like
Exactly.
so yeah.
Exactly. Wait, I was gonna say something else about Liam and yeah, and I also just felt like, well, his battle with Checo, I I don't know, it felt like a little bit aggressive, like maybe he went too far. And then the battle with Franco
Mhm.
later in the race, I just yeah, he's clearly like he has a point to prove and he's really like going after it.
Yeah.
But I just feel like it yeah, it kind of and there's some people who are like that's awesome. I love that Liam has like the, I don't even know, like he's going for it. He's not afraid. He's not going to back
Yeah.
down to these drivers. Like I guess, but I don't know. It didn't really sit well with me particularly, but
I think
I don't know.
I will say honestly, the battling I was cool with.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
and
Same.
it was just when it got to the point where he was like, I just don't think there's any need to there's an unsportsmanlike behavior to it, right? It's the same way, like,
Yes.
it's harder in Formula One to see unsportsmanlike behavior because they're in a car. But to
Right.
take one hand off the wheel and make the effort to flip off someone that is already going through a bad time. You know what I
Right.
mean? Just
Like,
already having a
yeah,
bad
you're
day.
passing him for P16 or something. Like it's
Yeah.
just sort of like, what's going on here? I don't know. It was just a little like weird. And I actually said this on our episode. Like if Fernando and Lewis were
Mm,
battling and one of them flipped off the other one, I'd be like, yes, this is
yeah.
awesome. Like because those two guys have been through hell and back and together, not together. Like they have their whole thing going on, but but they had that underlying respect for each other. And it would have been
Yeah.
kind of funny and sort of they could have both handled it. It's just a
Sure.
little it just was I don't know, it didn't feel like evenly reciprocated or something.
Absolutely. No, yeah,
I'm
what
not sure
you're
what I'm
talking
trying to
about is
say.
like no, I get your point because 'cause you're saying, like, a level of when there's history between drivers, there's already a
Yes.
level of, like, camaraderie. If, for example, Valtteri happened to somehow pass Lewis and flip him off, hilarious. We'd all be talking about it forever.
Yes.
But
Yes.
this level of, like, you are absolutely the new kid on the block. You do have something
Right.
to prove. We're talking about you potentially taking this guy, the guy that you're being rude to, his seat. Like,
Right.
there's just a I don't know, and I think the other thing that's kind of frustrating about it is that I look back and I'm like, right now I know we're all trying to be okay with Liam, and I felt really bad for him like it's sort of like when your parents get divorced and one of them starts dating again, you know what I mean? You're like, okay, yeah, I guess this girl can come to dinner if she has to. Like,
But
okay,
you really liked when the other person was around too.
yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
I miss that one. I miss when we were a happy family. Like, I get it. Like, I want you to be
Totally.
happy, but I wanna be
Totally.
happy too. Like,
Yes.
so
And
it's
and Liam has not come into a good environment. Like it is the worst circumstance for someone to come in, replacing like the worst driver you could ever replace in Formula 1.
absolutely.
Like it's all not a good there's already gonna be a lot of people who already are going to want him to fail just
Yeah.
because of who he's replaced and how it went down and everything like that. It has nothing to do with him at all.
Right.
So yeah, to your point, he didn't really do himself any favors. I actually had a question for you too.
Mm,
I was curious about whether or not, like, if you thought the Liam Checo battle and sort of Checo then getting that damage, because at that point in time, Checo was fighting through the field. He was getting close. I think he was in the points at that point in time and could have finished in the points, and then obviously gets the damage and then doesn't finish in the points,
sure.
flipping off. On one hand, I'm like, okay, Liam obviously is fighting Checo for his future, could get that Red Bull seat. Like, I think Red Bull as a whole would like, to some degree, like that kind of aggressiveness from Liam. On the other hand, it's sort of like back when George and Valtteri were fighting for the Mercedes seat,
Mhm.
and George was being too aggressive with Valtteri. And it's like, that actually you actually ruined Red Bull. Like, Red Bull could have gotten more points
Yeah.
today, that could have helped them in the constructors, that could have, so I'm like, does that do Liam any favors, or does that actually hurt him to some degree?
Here's the thing for Liam that I think he doesn't recognize. Red Bull is not looking for someone to replace Max. They're looking for someone to support Max.
Right.
I think the thing with Liam is that you look at it and it's like last season he comes in and replaces Danny for a couple of races. His reaction to Daniel taking his seat back was pretty intense. When you look at the way it was profiled on Drive to Survive, but also he gave a lot of interviews about it too. There was just kind of this feeling of like, I've been racing great, and there's no reason that someone else who was in the seat before me should come back and take their seat just because they healed. I feel like I've proven myself. I feel like he knocked Max out of qualifying in a single race last season. That now I don't even remember what race it was, but that's such a big
Singapore.
talking about. Thank you, Singapore. Um, so it's like you have him knocking Max out in Singapore. You have his performance is genuinely a very good performance, but he's driving in a way where it's like, yeah, you unfortunately for VCarb and the fact that you want this Red Bull seat, you need to recognize that the more important person on track is the person in a Red Bull car. And yes, you want to outperform Checo, you want to prove that you can, all these different things. But when you're driving, first of all, imagining Liam and Max as teammates right now after today, I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you're looking at crashes, you're looking at radio messages that just
Yeah.
nobody can seem to hear anything other than the F bomb every other word, like, and quite frankly, like, Liam is driving really emotionally, and Max needs someone who can just consistently I and I don't wanna say this to rub salt in the wound, but Max needs a Daniel from when they were
Yes.
teammates. He needs someone
Yes.
who can consistently score points, not mess up Max's race, and do his best to keep bring the car home in the points every week.
Right. I think it's also a slightly not unfair, but like, because I feel like that's the whole thing people talked about is like they need to get back to the Max Daniel days, right? Like
Yeah.
that's when that they were the best in terms of like the teammates, but it's also not fair entirely because Max, they were so evenly matched at that time because Max was very new to Formula One and like was
Mhm.
coming up and Daniel was beating Max, but that's also because it was like Max's first few years in Formula One.
Sure.
And so I feel like it's a little bit I don't think you'll ever get back to that because Max will never be a rookie again. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So
absolutely.
it's not always fair, but yeah, I feel like Red Bull is just in such a like they're in just the most difficult situation because I don't think Liam had like a bad race weekend, but he didn't have like a great. He got passed by Franco, like he didn't
Yeah.
have like a amazing weekend, I would say. And obviously Checo didn't have a great weekend, and so it's just and Yuki didn't have a great weekend, and so and then you have now all this other drama with, like, the flipping off and the,
Mm,
like, radio, and so it's just interesting, like, I don't and we have races to go, of course, but I just don't know where Red Bull is gonna, like, end up
land, yeah.
going because there's kind of, like, pros and cons to sort of everybody.
Something I'm curious about for you is like a word that has started to come up for me with Liam after this weekend and trying to put things. I think last weekend I was really like, we got to be nice to him. He's getting so much hate for something that he can't control. It's not his fault
Right.
that Daniel like got bumped out. But then this weekend you look at the behavior and it reminds you of other things. And what I do wonder for you is like if you feel like Liam has a little bit of entitlement to his seat that he hasn't necessarily earned yet.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, entitlement is maybe too strong of a
Mm,
word. I think he feels a lot of confidence that he deserves the top seat,
mm, yeah,
and to your point, I don't know that he's fully proven even his races last year. Like people obviously bring up the knocking Max out of qualifying, which is
yeah,
sort of funny because it's like, well, yeah. I mean, it was a great performance, but I
sure,
think it gets kind of overblown a little bit.
yeah.
But he was good. He was a solid driver last year, but it wasn't like he was blowing the roof off of the place, at least from my
Yeah.
perspective. Like he was good. And
Mhm.
I think this year too, like or since he's come back, he's been good. But he hasn't been like oh my goodness, like this
Mhm.
he's which is fine. He's still so new and like inexperienced and I don't expect him to be. But to your point, he kind of has an attitude like he is great, and maybe he will
Yeah.
be great. I I don't know. I don't wanna be like I am known as, like, the Daniel Ricciardo girl, so I don't wanna be the one who comes on and's, like, coming down hard on Liam. Like,
Yeah.
don't I try to separate everything, and
No,
not
absolutely.
fully give him the benefit of the doubt and not, like, be too harsh on him, or I try to check myself and I'm like, "Am I judging him too harshly because I still have, like, a little bit of resentment, and I'm
About
a little
Daniel,
bit
sure.
frustrated?" I mean, I certainly allow that to creep in with my, feelings towards Checo. I'm like, "Oh, okay, so Checo gets to just have week after week after week after week after week bad performances, and he gets to stick around." Like,
Mhm.
I recognize that I have that, like, resentment, but,
Sure.
I don't know. I think my gut is telling me that Liam will get a shot at the Red Bull, and I will be interested to see how it goes. Like, it will be fun to watch. I don't
Yeah.
I don't know, will he do better than Gasly, Albon as the rookie, young driver getting into the Red Bull? I hope for his sake he does, because that wasn't a good experience for either of those 2 drivers,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
What I will say is on your Daniel Ricciardo check, I have been very critical of Daniel Ricciardo. I think I was critical of Daniel Ricciardo on your podcast. I was critical of Daniel last week. I've sort of made the point that I feel like as much as everyone's upset with Red Bull about the way that he departed, I also think we're forgetting the fact that Daniel left Red Bull in a very dramatic fashion, that Red Bull brought him back, that they gave him a second chance, that there is just a lot of history there that is not necessarily completely slated in Daniel's favor. I think Daniel from time to time makes these comments that make it feel like he doesn't respect the fact that he has such a large female fan base. And every once in a while, it seems like he doesn't really necessarily have his head on his shoulders in the way that I would like him to have it, is the most diplomatic way that I can put it. Um, and so what I would say is like, from your sense of am I like giving Daniel more credit than credit is due? Or am I, picking Liam or having kind of negativity for Liam because I'm upset about Daniel? I personally don't think that you're biased in that way. Personally, just because I'm frustrated with Liam as someone who was sort of like, it sucks that it happened in this way, but yeah, I don't know that Daniel necessarily deserved to stay. And I think Red Bull, the thing I've been saying to people over and over is Formula One teams are a business, not a family. And quite frankly, I feel like Daniel got a lot more family treatment than business treatment when on his return to Formula One. Um,
Totally agree.
so I think it's okay also to say that like Liam is kind of this week. I don't know that there's ever a sense where it's like acceptable to flip someone off on the track in that way and to be focused on doing that. I don't know.
And to your point too about, like, I feel like when you're a fan of someone, you can look at someone and be like, "I'm a fan of you, and also you've done things that I don't like," or
Mm,
you can recognize when they've disappointed you or let you down
sure.
or whatever. And I feel like I have the capability of being able to do that. And so with Liam, I feel like I'm not going to let this one moment. I'm not going to write off Liam or say this is how Liam is forevermore. Like, he can still win me over, or he can still make,
Sure.
but I think we both agree. It leaves a little bit of a bad taste in our mouth, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And so I hope, you know what? I hope whatever conversation needs to be had will be had. I hope obviously I am already wary of talking about it because I've seen an influx of hate for the
Oh,
behavior coming towards
100%.
him.
Yeah,
So it's like
yeah.
I'm already concerned about that, but I do hope that there's maybe just a conversation amongst the team that next week we come out and maybe Liam is just in a little bit better headspace moving forward. That's my fingers crossed prediction.
Yes, well, actually, I did predict that he's gonna make Nico Hulkenberg or Lewis
Oh, you're
Hamilton
right.
mad, so I kind of want that to happen just because I want to be right, and if it does happen, let's clip this part out, so I can say I
I
predicted
did
it
it.
correctly.
Yes.
Maybe it could be K-Mag. Actually, K-Mag, I feel like is the one, he's the infamous "suck my balls" mate. Um,
So true.
so you never know.
You never know. Yeah, you know what? I think we'll go with I hope
A
makes
Haas.
one step further and then he calms down.
Yes.
They
Yes,
both get
exactly. Exactly, exactly.
yeah. I will say outside of that, Franco didn't have the best race that he's had, but it was still a pretty strong performance from him. And Franco, we could talk about this now. We saw Lawson take a little bit of a contact with Franco in their little battle, which again, arguably nobody's fault, racing incident, blah blah blah. But interesting to see both of them that are kind of like in very different positions. Franco driving to prove that he can do it, knowing that there's really nowhere for him to go, and Liam driving with the expectation that he could maybe go even further than just getting a V carb seat for next year. Um, Watching the two of them battle, I was getting stressed, obviously, but I also wondered, given the rumors of Franco's team being contacted by Red Bull, if that was also part of that issue.
Right. I also it's interesting actually. I So Franco and Liam both started the race on hard tires, I think,
Mhm.
and then Liam pitted first, and then Franco pitted maybe like 10 laps later. I'm not exactly sure how many laps later, but a bit later.
Yeah.
And I was following it because he came out behind Liam, and he was like maybe 11 seconds behind Liam when he came out of the pits. And obviously he was on fresher tires, maybe like 10 laps newer tires, not a ton more,
Mhm.
but he just cut into that time so fast. I was watching the intervals. I was like, "Dang, he is really." Now, obviously, he had clear air, like he was making
Sure.
moves, but I was really impressed by how quickly he caught up to Liam and then past Liam. I was like, "Okay, he definitely is driving like with something to prove." And as you mentioned, there's been some rumors that if Red Bull decides to promote Liam to Red Bull, that they could potentially bring on Franco like on some loan situation with Williams. Will that happen? I don't know. But I still I'm like, Franco is 1000% deserving of a Formula One seat. And if I'm Red Bull with all of my
Current.
decisions to make, you know, I'm kind of like, yeah, he has safely proven himself. 5 races, I feel like that's a pretty good sample size. Like you kind of know whether or not a driver is at least has potential within 5 races. Franco has proven himself very much so. And I just feel like, and he's just also a great personality. Like, not that again, you
Yeah.
should be making decisions on drivers based off of personality, but he's just like a joy to have around. I enjoy him being around. I like his presence on the grid. So I would love to see him continue in some fashion.
Yeah, I think with Franco though, we do know like post race, he did basically say like, no one's talked to me about that. Um, so I don't know how much truth there is to the rumors. I will say James was a little bit
Yeah.
more cagey about it afterwards, where he sort of was like, we wouldn't want to get in anyone's way, but we would. So like there's that conversation too. And I think also there's things to remember with the fact that like Williams did want Liam originally for Franco's debut, and Red Bull basically was like, we would want him
Right.
back. So
Right.
there's a little bit of bad blood there too. I don't know. There's
Right.
a lot of different options. But I would love to see Franco make moves. I do think like Liam clearly thinks that Franco's a threat the way that he's driving.
Completely agree. Yes.
Last couple of things in the race itself would be Charles losing control. And I was so frustrated because right before this was when they really got caught in that backmarker traffic. It wasn't anything like that was Charles's fault. But when his race engineer was like, "We need your best driving now," I was like, "When do you not? When do you not need someone's best driving?"
I know. I always hate when they say like the most obvious thing. It's like, yeah, if I was the driver, I'd be like, no, duh. I mean, I would be the most annoying F1 driver. I'd have the most like Elwood style of comment of like talking to my engineer. Um, but yeah, it's just sort of like I probably wouldn't want those types of comments if I was an F1 driver. Like, tell me what's important. I'd be like a Kimi Räikkönen, Just tell me what I
Yeah.
need to know and shut up.
Yeah, if it doesn't have a number attached to it or my car's not on fire, leave me alone. Like,
Exactly.
it's interesting because I'm
Exactly.
like, every time I'm like, I love a little bit of encouragement, but I don't feel like any race
Sure.
grid knows how to properly encourage. You know what I mean? We need your
No, and it's
best. I've
hard. Very, very obvious statement. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's actually always my best, guys. There's actually
Yeah,
never a moment when I'm driving a car
where
at
it's my
200 miles
worst.
an hour that I think, let me do the worst way I could, you know? Leave me alone.
Exactly, exactly.
Which does obviously lead to Lando getting past Charles, and it was like a combination of frustration of like, oh, how did you lose control at this point? But also like very impressive save because many other drivers would have gone totally into the wall.
Oh my god, I was terrifying. Like, thankfully, it was
Yeah.
in a place where, yeah, he could have a little bit of space to kind of catch himself and correct himself. But I completely agree. I thought I like actually audibly kind of screamed when it happened
Yeah.
because it just kind of came out of nowhere. And obviously being a Charles Leclerc fan, I was very thankful that he at least managed to keep it on the track. And I feel like for him, third place was fine. I didn't feel like overly bummed about Lando passing. I felt like, you know what, that's all fine with me.
Agreed. Yeah. I was hoping for a Ferrari one too, but then I was sort of like, this is also a fine enough
Yeah,
scenario.
I
We
I
made it.
agree.
The last thing that we should talk about is this fastest lap battle, which did have
Oh,
me chuckling a little bit because
same, same.
immediately
I was
after
dying
that,
actually. Yeah.
I was like, okay, so basically we have at the point that it's called, Franco, I believe, had fastest lap.
I think Lando got it back from Franco, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, he did. You're correct. Yes,
Yeah,
he
I'm pretty
did get it
sure.
back from Franco.
Yes,
Yeah, because he had
yes,
it at that point, and then Charles immediately is like, "Let's think about fastest lap, AKA bring me in, put me on new tires, and let me get the fastest lap." They wait
yes.
until the very end of the race to then say, "Yes, pit for fastest lap." And then Red Bull brings Checo in
I know,
with a damaged car.
I know.
I
It was
it
crazy.
I just Checo going for it with damage to the car, I just was like, "Why are we adding insult to injury? Why are we hurting this man more?"
I know, and he was, I think, down by, like, 9 tenths to Charles' time, like, it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close,
No.
and I think they probably wanted to pit him maybe before they saw that Charles was pitting, like, I would have to imagine. I don't know why they would ever think, like, that they would compete with Charles Leclerc's time, but, and it was, I mean, even if Checo didn't have a damaged car, still a risky decision,
Yeah.
still, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it was interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I guess they maybe were trying to do, like, the Daniel Ricciardo thing of sort of, like, one last, like, thing for you to celebrate, like, for the fans, like, Checo at least gets fastest lap. I don't know. I'm making something up. I don't know.
No, no, I think I totally understand your point. I think obviously the problem was that, like, Max didn't have the gap to go for fastest lap and to pit,
Right.
whereas Charles did. He had a full 30
Right. Oh, yeah.
seconds
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't know. I was like, do they not everyone knows that Checo has, like, a gaping hole in his
I
sidecar,
know. It
right?
was
He's gonna
very weird.
still yeah,
Maybe they didn't
messy.
really know. They must have, I mean, they did know. They pitted, like, they could see it with
Sure.
their eyes, but, like, maybe they didn't know the
Maybe
extent of the damage. I don't know.
I don't
I don't
know.
fucking I don't know.
I everybody's doing their best. That's all I
They are.
know.
They are doing their
Um,
best, exactly. Wasn't the best weekend
oh,
for Red Bull, we can just say that.
no, very much so not. And I will say, like, after post race now, we've got Ferrari is second in the Constructors Championship. Lando has
Yep.
managed to close a little bit more of that gap to Max. And there's a real conversation about like what that looks like. I still don't know that Lando will be able to take we've talked about this earlier, but I don't see Lando managing to take drivers championship. I do potentially see Ferrari taking constructors though, which is exciting.
Yes, I could see it happening. I mean, I think that they will, at least it will get to a point where they are the final race. It will come down to the final race as to who will win the constructors. I don't necessarily know that they will win it, but I think it will come down to Abu Dhabi.
I really agree with you. I do think it'll be like the very end. I think it'll be down to the last limit. And I think what's exciting about that is that's what we also had last year with Mercedes and Ferrari, and that was just not for first, it was for
Yep,
second.
yep,
So I do love a long standing battle. I would ask
completely agree.
so just to wrap things up as we try to manage my internet connection. For normally we end with kind of like takeaways from the race or predictions for next week or the rest of the season. We've sort of done a little bit of our predictions already, but I am curious specifically how you feel about Max moving forward and the way that he may drive.
Interesting. That's a good question. Um I think Max will be more measured next week. I think he will be it all kind of depends on honestly where he qualifies and with the pace of the Red Bull next weekend. Like, I think there's a lot of factors at play, but I think given 20-second penalty that he got this week, like, that's a punishment, and I
Yeah.
don't think he's gonna wanna have to deal with that again, so I do think he will be a lot more measured. He's still Max Verstappen at his core, you
Yeah.
can't take that fully out of him, but, I think he's maturing, like, he's mature enough to know kind of, "Okay, I probably need to change it up a little bit so I don't have to deal with this again."
Very fair. The other thing I would say in Max's favor and towards what you're saying about him maturing and the 20-second penalty, I will say he, in all of his post-race interviews, was basically like, I don't want to talk about the penalty. Like, there's nothing that can be done about it. So we're done talking about it. Versus Christian Horner brought telemetry
I
data
saw that, I saw that, I saw that.
to his press, not even to the FIA stewards. It
Yeah.
was just to his press conference. It
That's a
was
man that is, he is I mean, I can't even say what I wanna say,
That's
so
fair, but I to some degree, I'm like, there's something funny about the complete, like, 180 between the 2 of them. Max is just like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
stuff
is what it is.
happens,"
Yeah.
you know?
Yep, exactly.
Versus he's
Yeah.
like, "I have it printed out. I literally do."
Well, Max has a lot I mean, Christian Horner, like, everything hinges on Red Bull performing and, whereas Max, he's free to do what I mean, he has a lot more flexibility in terms of his career and his future and what he can do, and, Christian sort of, he's made his bed.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, I guess the last thing that I want to talk about to end things on would be in the same press conference, Christian was asked about Checo and whether or not he'll make it all the way through. And Christian basically said it's a performance-based business and sometimes hard decisions have to be made. So for you, do you
Oof.
think they're going to let Checo go all the way through the season, or do you think there's a
Oof.
real conversation that he may not be there next week?
Wow. That's a great question. Um, that's a great question. I I think when push comes to shove, he will stick it out to the end of the season. I think Red Bull have done too much changes, there's been too much press around their decision making and whatnot. So, ultimately, I think Checo will be replaced at the end of the season, but even did you see that Checo was like, I'll be here next year. Like, I'm 100% confident that I will be here
Yeah.
next year," which I was sort of like, "Okay." But, I just no, I don't think they'll make a change. Would it surprise me if they did? No, but I don't think they will.
I will say from my end, I'm not sure. And the reason I'm not sure is that I think if they do make a move where they remove him after this race, then the rumors from earlier this season about Checo only staying because Liberty Media specifically
Right.
wanted Checo there for Mexico City are true. And so I think that's what they're sort of battling
Right.
against. Do
That's a very
they
good
move it
point.
up? And then the only other reason that it could be a possibility in my eyes would be if they have decided they're getting rid of Checo next season, then they need to test out whoever this last driver is going to be, because they would then have another vacancy now that they've gotten rid of Daniel. I'm going to say, you know what, Zoe? Hopefully, people have made it through this episode without the experience that we had, which was quite a bit of disconnection. Hopefully, you're getting to the end and you're like, oh, that was so smooth. What a smooth episode. Um, so I have to give the disclaimer because I need the audience to know that when I say thank you for your time today, I genuinely mean thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your time. This was a joint effort, the 2 of us together. We will be bonded for the rest of our lives. We will have always, we've gone through this. We've gone through something together, you and
We
I.
really genuinely have.
We've been bonded. We've been bonded over this like no other. No, seriously, thank you so much for your time, and I love talking Formula 1, so I'm grateful you asked me to be on your show, and I'm available anytime. Hopefully, if we ever do this again, we'll both have optimal internet
I'm
running full
thinking
speed.
next time I'm gonna personally have the guy from Spectrum here. I'm going to have him hold the router the entire time.
Would love that. Would love that. That'd be
Yes.
awesome.
But yes, I would love to have you back, and hopefully everyone will get to hear you back, and hopefully we can get this part out. If people would like to find you on the internet, where can they do so?
So they can find us on social media at Fan Behavior Podcast, Instagram, TikTok. Our podcast episodes come out every Monday morning. We do race recaps. That's just Fan Behavior. Anywhere you get your podcasts, we are on YouTube. Also at Fan Behavior if you want to watch our episodes. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. And I think that was maybe the smoothest part of the recording so far.
Amazing. Perfect. Plugged myself. Yay.
Well, thank you, Zoe, and thank you to everyone who's listening. Always, if you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.